The U.S. men's national team is more talented than it's ever been, and obviously youth development has improved in the United States of America. There has never been a more clear pathway to becoming a professional soccer player in the United States. Better infrastructure, better coaches, not great coaches, but better than what we used to have, and much more. But why does it feel like something is missing? How come the U.S. men's national team can never have world-class players? Not even one. I mean, Christian Pulisic and prime Tim Howard are probably the closest we have ever got. And even if you think Pulisic is world-class, I'm not really going to debate you in this episode. It's not the point. Christian Pulisic looks more like he's an anomaly and not the norm. Also, why are we so reliant on players developed outside of the United States? Like Anthony Robinson, Serginho Dest, Yunus Musa, Floating Balogun, Johnny Cardoso. I mean, it's good to have them, and I like having them, but it feels like we mainly have these guys because we don't develop enough players in the United States, not enough elite players. Today we're going to be talking about the real issues with U.S. soccer youth development with a youth soccer expert as a guest. And I know many of you are going to say the issue is pay to play. And you are right to a certain extent, but that's not quite what we're going to be talking about today. Hello. If you are new here, I'm Filippo and welcome to Tactical Manager TV, and today we have a youth soccer development episode with a very special and knowledgeable guest. And his name is Tom Byer, the American that helped revolutionize youth soccer development in Japan and continues to do tremendous work in Asia with multiple Asian countries in recent years, and they'll probably see the results within the next few decades. He's also the author of the book Soccer Starts at Home, which I'm going to be putting a PDF version of the book in the description of this video for free. The book is very good for parents and I highly recommend it. And once again, it's free. There's no catch. And I know that theories are cool and all, but the most important thing in life is actual experience. Nothing beats real life experience in anything, in any job, in any work, in anything you do. And we're going to be talking about that a lot throughout the video. However, I want you to help us with your own experience. Let me know in the comment section any bad or good experiences that you might have had in US youth soccer as a parent or as a player. Okay, now make sure to also hit the like button. It's a great way to help the channel for free. I'm not going to be asking during the video because we're going to have a guest, so make sure you hit the like button right now. Don't forget. And once again, we're not going to really be addressing pay to play in this episode. We can do a separate one for that. We're going to be mainly addressing the technical side of it, right? The on the field issues. Okay? With that said, let's roll the episode. Okay, Tom, welcome back to the channel. We've had you a while back, and if anyone missed those episodes, that one you gave more of a story of your background, everything that happened in Japan, and I know you still do tremendous work there in Asia with youth development and some work even with UEFA, but we met in Japan in November of 2024. So depending on when someone's watching this, it might have been just now, it might have been a year after when they're watching it. And we talked about soccer for hours, of course. And there were a few things that you said that kept bugging me, not in a bad way, but I kept thinking about it. And one thing you told me when we were eating sushi, delicious sushi, by the way, in Japan, obviously, as everyone would expect, you said that very often coaches or clubs, they're always trying to figure out how to develop the world-class player, how to develop Neymar, Messi, Ronaldo. And you said that's all upside down. We shouldn't be doing it that way. You should raise the level of the floor, and that'll just push the ceiling higher. And when you were talking to that, just for context, you're obviously referring to early age development. You're not talking about a 17-year-old. You're talking about a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old. Not someone's like, hey, get an 18-year-old and just have him. No, that's what it was. I thought about it a lot, and it started to make more and more sense the more we talked about it. So I wanted you to expand upon that. Why do you believe that the way to go is help the development of maybe the worst players, raise their level, and that'll raise also to eventually develop that so-called world class that comes around every other generation, depending on the country, if you're not like Argentina, Brazil, Germany, or France. So that was my first question, but I got a lot more to go.
Yeah, well, to unpack it a little bit more. So my whole philosophy is exactly what you said, but I'll say it in my own words. The best way to make the best players better is by making the worst players better. I sometimes don't like to use the word worst, but the least developed players. And the reason why is because those lesser developed players are going to push the better players to become better. What do I mean? Okay, you're an American typical volunteer, inexperienced dad or mom that coaches a team. Okay, you're coaching your son or daughter's under 10 team. You inherit 20 little 10-year-olds on day one, and you've got two or three players that are dynamite players. They're super whiz kids. Everybody thinks lightning struck in a bottle. Whoa, these kids are good. And you've got 17 kids that are beginners. Okay, now as the season progresses, those three kids you're going to depend upon a lot. They're probably going to score most of the goals. You're going to put them in key positions. Maybe one's a striker, one's a central midfielder, and off you go. Sometimes even maybe when they don't show up to practice because they're late or they're sick, probably you're going to play them on the weekends. Okay. So this is how it starts to go a little bit wrong because they have little to no pressure on them. But imagine now you're at a higher level because this is what happens at the professional level. You take a Man City or any big club in the world, Real Madrid, any club, and basically the starting 11 and the 11 or 15 players that are sitting on the bench, they're all interchangeable. All of them are. They're all play for national teams. You don't know on any given day what player rotation Pep Guardiola is going to use. He's going to use his positions depending upon who he's lining up against. So that's where the problem is. So when you close the gap between the very best and the least developed, that's when the elite player pool explodes. We're seeing that now with Japan today. The work that we put in place 30 years ago has created such an enormous elite player pool that our players, I just posted something on social media yesterday about it, not just our players, but coaches, they're being rated by the Europeans. And the reason why is because, yeah, Japan has gotten to that pinnacle. They've gotten to that turning point now where we've got an explosion. So that's what I'm talking about when you raise the level. So it starts at the youngest age groups. So when you look at the countries that develop top players in the world, what my argument is that that's not necessarily the result of better coaching or better curricula or better elite player pathways or better facilities. What it's a result of is cultures that are in place that are conducive to developing players as early as 5, 6, 7, and 8. And the reason why is because in those countries, and in particular, let's even talk about Latin countries because they do have more of an image of developing top players, especially technical players. Latin fathers in particular, and maybe moms as well, will use football as a tool to bond with their kids. So they're getting this tremendous head start. And in my work that I do, and I know what I know because I'm living in it. I'm not this like theorist talking about it. I work with thousands and thousands of players. The reality is that the football world hasn't yet caught up to what science knows, and that is that you can develop technical players from a very, very young age if they get off to what I call or I should say Todd Bean. I don't know if you know Todd. Todd's a real good educator. He's the son-in-law of Johan Cruyff. And so Todd Bean is the one who said it about football starts at home. He said what Tom's doing or what the program is doing is getting kids off to a flying head start. So there's a major difference when a child crosses over the line into organized play at the age of 6. If that child is already comfortable and competent with the ball at their feet, then they're going to start layering on, scaffolding on game intelligence, combination play, creative play. It takes a different type of coach. And so if you inherit 20 little 6-year-olds that have never touched a ball, that's a different type of coach. That's where you get into the isolated training, breaking down skills, teaching them how to stop and start with a ball. So they're getting behind because in Spain or in Brazil or in some of these countries where we're developing some of the most brilliant, artistic, creative players in the world, when they cross over the line into organized play, they're actually benefiting from good coaching. And that's where it is. In America, in some countries, kids can't quite benefit from the good coaching because they're so bad technically. So what happens is people, they believe actually mistakenly that the coaching is really bad. But sometimes the coaching is actually quite good, but kids can't benefit from it So it's very misunderstood. And unless you really understand it, you can't quite put a strategy in place for long-term development for a community or a club or a country or state or what have you. And that's the space that I work in. So I feel very passionate about it. But I hope I wasn't too long-winded with my
No,
answer to
no,
your question.
that was good. And I like the fact that you mentioned coaching, because that was another thing you told me that kept bugging me. When we were talking, and I'm paraphrasing, so I'm going to use my wording.
Yeah.
I'm not putting words into your mouth, but sometimes the way I talk can be a little bit more aggressive with it. But you said that the coaches in Japan, the word I would use are suck, but you probably said it in a more gentle way, like they're not great, they're not the best. I'm going to say it suck, and I'm going to add to it. The coaches in Brazil mostly suck too. I've seen it, and obviously when I went to Japan, parts of it was tourism, but I did want to get like to know more of the soccer culture, and part of it was talking to you. Part of it was going to a game, the Cerezo Osaka Kashima Hunters game that you got for me. Went to that game. I try to go to little soccer communities that they had there around the stadium of Tokyo FC. I try to get as involved as possible because I want to see it and talk about it, because I've experienced it in Mexico, I've experienced it in Brazil, I've experienced it in America. And you told me the coaches there sucked or they weren't good, which was quite a surprise to me. I thought that was part of the key to their success. It's like, it's not just the soccer starts at home program that you have that gets parents to bond with kids at early ages to develop technical ability. But I was like, the coaches are probably good. But then after you told me they were not good, I was just thinking to myself, so coaching will matter in a professional level when you're trying to win games. It matters a lot. Now, in youth development, you're saying Japan's not good at it. I'm telling you Brazil's not good at it. I can't speak on behalf of other countries because I don't want to speak on something I haven't seen with my own eyes. So would you say that to develop elite players, the coaching at youth level is almost irrelevant? Maybe
Yes.
irrelevant might be too far, but not
Yeah.
that important.
With the caveat, not that important if you've got a pool of players that are technically sound. That's the caveat.
Mm-hmm.
So they're obviously relevant if you inherit a group of 20 kids that have never touched the ball before. But here, that's where the difference is. The difference is that, and I'll use a someone who is not a very technical, gifted player at the time, but Roy Keane. I have a slide in my presentation from Roy Keane, and here's what he says: skill was and never will be the result of coaching. It's a love affair between child and ball. And I would say that sums up Brazilian kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't fall in love necessarily with playing football. They fall in love with the ball first. And that can lead to a lifetime of both playing and watching. I can't help but say that in America, in a lot of the areas, we try to force kids to fall in love with football or soccer, and the ball gets in the way. So if you can understand those two statements, I think you're on your way to understanding development. So this is what the big kind of, I believe, misunderstanding in coaching has been. So when you see the little 6 or 7-year-old kid that shows up to some training, your kid's team or whatever, and he's like this super fantasista kid. He just takes the ball and he just runs around everybody like they're cones. People will naturally think that lightning struck in a bottle. They'll think, oh, he was born like that. Oh, where his parents, where are they from? Blah, 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 blah. They never saw the silent practice that usually takes place. And it'll usually have taken place because there's a culture at home that values some kind of development. And so he got introduced, or she got introduced to a ball earlier. So here in Japan, as we were talking before about communities and things, is that community is the backbone of football development in this country. So again, out my two windows here, I've got my two boys, junior high school and elementary school. And that's where they grew up playing football. And I can just tell you, because I'm in the community, I live in the community, all of those coaches there, all of them are volunteer fathers, a majority of them. There'll be some younger guys that maybe graduated from the junior high school that just come back and they're just volunteering because, again, it's a community volunteer based. But there's no specialized coaching going on at any of these places. Sometimes I'm pulling my hair out. But what I saw was, and this is where the big kind of, awakening, so to speak, was for me, is that I saw with my two sons, who are very good technically, because again, I got them off to a head start. Once they crossed over that line into organized play, they were on their own. I was a very hands off. Very rarely I even gave any comments or advice to my kids. I go watch the games. I'm probably the quietest parent on the sidelines. I don't say anything. Coaches probably were always wondering, like, why do we got this guy, Tom Byer, who's on TV every day doing this technical corner, but he doesn't come over here and coach the kids? Because I made a decision to stay out of my kids' coaching. But in the beginning, I was pulling my hair out because I thought, wow, my kids are really good technically. And they've got a coach, they've got coaches, both of them, who had never played football. Organized guys, responsible, but inexperienced. So I'd watch the training sessions. But then it kind of it hit me. And this is where I had a complete, rethink about what I'm saying, is that then at the end of the 6 years of my son playing at the elementary school, I saw he had improved quite a bit. He was still the best player. And then I thought, you know what? This was a really good environment for my son to be in because he was really good technically. The coach didn't know much about coaching, so he didn't overcoach him. So I think that can be said for a lot of kids. Go ahead.
No, the reason I was gonna interrupt there is because it's not where I disagree with you, but I'm gonna reinforce one thing that you said.
Sure.
I do think coaching is not what's gonna lead to a world-class player. You can't really coach a world-class player. You can't coach the world-class ability into a kid or a teenager or anything. But I do think in the US, we do have the issue of overcoaching, and we also have the issue of what you just said. Maybe culturally speaking, and you can speak on behalf of Japan, someone that doesn't know soccer is humble enough to just get out of the way because I don't know. I'm not a coach. Let's say me, baseball. I'm not a baseball coach. If you put me to coach baseball and I go to help, I'm going to get out of the way and kind of let the kids play. I don't know if that would work with baseball. I'm just giving an example. It's a sport that I don't know anything. In the US, and I've seen this multiple times, parents that, they're acting on good faith. They want to help and they'll be a volunteer for whatever, like a baseball guy or something. They'll still try to coach. And then you're going to get very often like Brits, like the English coaches that come here and they bring in a philosophy that they try to jam in a kid's head. So you can't dribble. You can't do this. They kill off the creativity. It's kick and run, hustle, good tackle. They clap when you tackle. So where maybe I disagree with you, but I don't think we disagree on this. I think that bad coaches, coaches that stay out of the way or coaches that are good, they're good for youth development. So not having a good coach is not the issue. But when you have a bad coach, it can really screw over the kid's development. Let's say the kid has all that creativity and flair, and then they have a coach just every time they try. Like if I'm coaching a kid, a 10-year-old, and he tries a rainbow flick, I'm applauding him. Try it again. Try it again. Well, some coaches, especially the Brits, I love talking about them. I know a lot of them. They get angry at that. They get very angry, and they'll not want the kid to express himself. That's what's the creativity, the flair. They want that all out. So I do think there are bad coaches that affect youth development in the United States. There's also really bad scouting here of young talent because they'll go for the big kid, right? The big kid will get you goals at an early age if he's bigger than the average kid. And they don't know how to identify. It was like that kid right there has the ability, the fundamentals already sharp, but he's just not as big as that other kid. So he's not going to be as good right now at this age. I see this issue a lot in the United States. And just to make it clear, I know I was picking on the Brits right now because that's my experience here. It's not just them. It's the Americans. It's many different coaches here. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
I 100% agree. We have no disagreement. So what I'm saying is, yeah, there's too much overcoaching going on. And I think the reason why, and I might be wrong, but my explanation for that is you'll find the overcoaching more when you've got a coach who's working with players who are not technically good. So I think they think that they have to overcompensate because they think that in order for the team to be performing better and to get the players better, it's a coaching problem.
You want one more thing? That is one of the reasons. Yes. You want to know the other reason? In the US, it almost feels like at times parents want to be lied to and tricked. What do I mean by that? People are not in the business of developing players here. They're in the business of making money with soccer schools or whatever it is. Soccer schools are fine, but I even have one. But I'm in the business of trying to make the players better. If they don't get better with me, and by that is not me teaching them, but me giving them the tools to do so. If they don't get better with me, I failed.
Yeah.
But what happens is very often, if you go to a parent, so if I get a group of kids that are 6 and they're all technically developed, like you mentioned, I will try to let them play more than do drills.
Of course.
But when you do that, the parents think you're scamming them.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to tell them, like, listen, your kid doesn't need the drills. He needs to actually play. And what I'm doing here is having him play in a controlled environment. Then you need to have him play in a disorganized environment where there's no coaches. But it's good to have both. But they think you're scamming you. So then the parent will leave my soccer school and go to the coach that puts 20 different cones, drills that do absolutely nothing for that player that is already well-rounded, right? He's ready to play. He needs to play. And he'll just keep doing drills. And what happens is 2 things. 1, the kid doesn't get better. And 2, the kid sometimes falls out of love with the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is another thing, too, in the U.S.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to, again, those really strong, rich football cultures, the Brazils, the Spains, the Latin countries. The just let him play mantra works, man. So this is the big misunderstanding. There is a terminology in football and in coaching in particular that says, just let him play. The game's the teacher. The ball's the teacher. They believe this. And I think what it stems from is back in the 1970s when coaches' education started to become proliferated. It came from mainly 3 countries. It came from Germany, it came from Holland, and probably England. And even before that, England. Everybody thought that these countries had the monopoly on football development. Okay. So you'd get that terminology, the ball's just the teacher, just let the kids play, because they didn't take into consideration that there was a technical deficit in players, because most coaches' education has never been set up centered around technique. It's been basically focused on systems, tactics, formations, patterns of play, positional play, all of psychology, all of that. And what I say is that football hasn't caught up to what science knows already. And that is that skill acquisition happens at a much earlier age. And back in the 70s, I swear this is truth. I've talked to a lot of coaches about this. Back in the 70s, people believed that you were either born with technical skills or you couldn't really teach it. You couldn't really learn it or improve it. That's why the work of this Dutchman, Will Curver, he changed the world of technical coaching, because what he did was he took players who were actually elite players, and he wanted to see if he could improve the elite players' technical ability. But then he started realizing that you could actually take just regular players and improve and have power. So there's been a lot of stuff that just has not caught up with time. And so now, in the perfect world for me, this would be football development. Ensure that before these kids cross over the line into organized play, like my kids, they're already technically sound. Then every time that they come to football training, either in the junior high, very simple, man. As a coach, I'm just going to set up a couple mini field pitches and just let my kids play. Do a little warm up and just let them play. That's what kids want to do. They want to play football. They don't want to sit there and do big, long lines and hear about exercises, this, that, and the other thing. But that doesn't happen because we live in an imperfect world, where maybe in Brazil this can happen, or Spain, or some of the strong footballing cultures. But the reality is that coaches are challenged because they inherit a group of kids of vastly different abilities. So they get the under 10 or under 12 team with a couple of kids that are really good, a couple of kids that so-so, and then some kids that they can't transfer the ball from the right foot to the left foot. You do a training, or you play a mini game, and unless you put some kind of constraint on it, like 1 touch, 2 touch, you'll get the dribbler who's just going to take the ball every time and dribble around all the other 5 players and score every time. So there's such an imbalance of what's happening. But here, again, comparing Japan, we're talking about, and the U.S., we just develop much more on a larger scale technical players, which is going to ensure that gap between the best and the worst doesn't get so much bigger than it does in other countries.
Let's talk about that, because I'm going to bring up another thing you talked to me while I was in Japan, and you might remember this. So we met in Tokyo, and then I headed to Osaka. That's where I went to a very good game. I had a lot of fun watching Kashima Antlers and Cerezo Osaka. I don't know if I pronounced it right.
Good
Um,
intonation. Good
it
stuff.
was sold out. These are traditional teams there, from what I heard. It was a great environment, and I was there also to judge the quality of play. I left the game. I and then I think I called you, or you called me, and we talked. And you asked me, the first thing you asked me is like, "What did you think of the level of play?" And I said something along these lines. I think if you remove the designated players from MLS, so the Messis, Thiago Almada when he was still in Atlanta, Ricky Puig, these like very high level players that are making $8, $5, $6, $7, $8 million a year, that are players that could be playing the top five leagues. Like these are players that are elite level. If you remove them, I thought without the DPs, MLS and the J League were very similar levels. I'll say maybe I thought so. From what I've seen many. Keep in mind, this is only one J League game that I've watched. Outside of that, I've only watched highlights. But
Yep.
watching it on the field, I was like, if you remove the DPs, the level's probably very similar. But then you pointed out one thing to me. Maybe the biggest difference here is in the J League, most of the players are Japanese, which means Japan is developing more players at that maybe MLS level that I would say. And then a few go to Europe and do very well. Now, I was working on a video because we have January Camp Cupcake coming up for the U.S. men's national team, which is the camp that they only have MLS players. And when I was building a American-based MLS roster, it was really, really bad. The best Americans are in Europe, the best Americans. And the best players in MLS are foreign, the best players. And by best players, I don't just mean the DPs. Even right below the designated players, they're mostly foreigners, and they're very, very good. They're good players, but they're not American, which means we're maybe not developing enough, especially for a country this big. But here's the thing: we already defined that coaching is not what's carrying Japan. It's not coaching. So even if we were to blame coaching in the U.S., not a valuable excuse. The second thing I want to talk about here is that the J League and MLS were born around the same time. So
Yes.
that's another not excuse. The second thing is soccer is not the number one sport in Japan. Now, it's more popular in Japan than it is in the US in a per capita basis, I would say. But it's not the number one sport. So Japan's best athletes might not be playing soccer. They might be playing the most popular sport, which I believe is baseball, right?
Well, I will go ahead.
Yeah. So my question to that is this. We talk about this. I do think Japan is doing a better job developing players because if anyone wants to debate me on this, I think the U.S. men's national team and Japan are pretty close at the same level for one or another. But remove from the U.S. men's national team every single player not developed in MLS. We would get spanked by Japan. Just for context here, we lose Pulisic right away. He wasn't developed in MLS. Balogun, Johnny Cardoso, Serginho Dest, Anthony Robinson, our best left back, maybe the best left back we ever had. Dest, that I already mentioned. Musa. Like, if I keep going and you remove all those players, Japan is much better. So what's missing here? Because Japan also does have that cultural gap. They don't have the soccer culture Brazil has, Argentina has. They don't have that cultural gap. So how do we fix this in America? And I know US soccer won't do crap about this. MLS kind of doesn't do it. So maybe to the viewers, like the parents watching or soccer fans, how do we help fix this over time?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there.
I
I'll
talk a lot. I talk a lot.
No, that's good. But I would kind of disagree about baseball being the most popular. And again, what's the standard? What are we basing that on? We've got, I think it's 12.
Google. I'm basing it off Google.
Yeah, because and yeah, who does Google? Maybe a bunch of Americans sitting in Cupertino or wherever they have their headquarters. I think that's Apple. But here's where I don't think that's an accurate assessment. First of all, we've got a super healthy professional league, 3 divisions with 60 teams. That's a lot of professional clubs here. They're all very well supported. When the national team plays, there is no better television rating for anything in this country than when our Japan national team plays. That's another one. And then participation-wise, football dwarfs baseball, double digits. It beats it by participation. So I
Rec?
think
You
it's an
mean
old
rec?
cliche. I think it's an old kind of belief that baseball is more popular. So again, maybe revenue something, but at the very least, I would not want to see that. But I'd say it's pretty equal. But
Okay.
anyway, that's not the point.
So wait. So would you say soccer is the number one sport tied right
Well,
there?
it's the number one participation sport. It's if you look at the sheer volume of business, you've got a 60 professional clubs versus 12. So the revenue can't even be close. I would say so. I'm not sure what the metric is they're always using for that. Maybe it's
Has
a
it
TV.
changed over the years, Tom?
So, for example, the television contract here, if I'm not mistaken, is either a $1 or $2 billion deal for 10 years with DAZN. It's a pay to play model. It's a subscription base, where baseball is kind of like that as well. So I don't know what the numbers are, but I just know participations wise, you can't compare. More kids play soccer than baseball here. But the difference, and I think it's interesting and important for the viewers to know, regardless whether which one's better or bigger or whatever, Japan specializes in sports. So you can't play baseball and soccer. You can't play volleyball and basketball. You can't play any of these sports. We run from a calendar year of April 1st to March 30th or whatever the date is, and it goes all year. There's no seasonal, on season, off season. It goes around the clock there. And that's one of the reasons, again, why we develop so many good players, because to become a good technical player at a young age, just matters how much time you've got the ball at your feet, and they over practice it. One other important point that I think that I want to point out here is that Japan also has some designated players here. They have players, but here's the difference. A guy, and I wrote him down, a guy like Iniesta, who came in, past his prime, contributed significantly, popularizing the game. But let me tell you, man, he fought really hard to get playing time amongst all the other players. Juan Mata came here, and I'm not joking. I didn't even know he was in the country and on the team, Vissel Kobe, until I saw them. They played their last game. It was the year ago or the year before when they won the championship. And I saw Juan Mata walking around clapping after they won the championship. I thought he was injured. No, he just couldn't get in the starting 11. They wouldn't play him. So there's a big difference in the quality of foreigners, or maybe the level of players coming here and trying to get into the starting 11. Whereas, those guys are pretty much a shoe-in at the MLS clubs because, again, as I've said before, but I'll say it again, you might be right where maybe the level of the national team players, Japan and America, although Japan's got the bragging rights because if you remember before the last World Cup, they played the U.S. and beat them 2-0.
Before the World Cup, yeah.
Might have been just a good day. But I would agree with you. The pull of six, we've got some great American players, don't get me wrong. But here's where it's different, and I think you might agree. That gap between the players, the Japanese players that are playing in European leagues and the Japanese players playing here, that gap's very small. And as you know, I mean, some of these MLS clubs, I heard just only recently that the New York when Red Bulls played in the final, that was a historic event because there were 5 Americans on the field for the Red Bulls. Apparently, that's a lot. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these teams are carrying, rosters where Americans aren't in the starting 11.
Orlando's terrible with it.
So here in Japan, that's impossible because there's rules and regulations against that, actually. So you can only have.
What I was going to say to your point about the U.S., it's another thing that I noticed with Japanese soccer, and that wouldn't be just Japan; it would be multiple countries. Most countries develop their players pretty much in their country, and that's not just Japan. When I talk about it, English players are developed in England. Brazilian players, of course, there are exceptions here and there, right? I believe Jamal Musiala was developed in England, and he plays for Germany, but that's one guy, right? Most players are developed in their own countries, while in the U.S., sure, Pulisic, for example, was developed in the U.S., but he's an anomaly. He didn't go for the conventional way. Like his dad knew what he was doing. So he's an anomaly. And there's a mix of genetics and a bunch of things that work out for Christian Pulisic. We can't use him as the rule when we haven't developed another Christian Pulisic, and he didn't go through MLS, right? What happens with that is you get Christian Pulisic developed one way, And then Balogun developed in England, another. Then you get Musa in England. Then Johnny Cardoso in Brazil. Then Dest in the Netherlands. All of a sudden, A-Rob in England. All of a sudden, when you look at this team, there's not an identity anymore with the American team. While Japan, when you talk about the gap might even be big. Like Mitoma to a J League player, the gap is probably big, but they all have a very similar style of play. So when you put them in the team, it doesn't change the way this team plays. In the US, sure, it's good to have a diverse range of players in terms of technical ability and athletic ability, all of that. And the US does have that. But like it's just the style of play is just completely different. It's a different culture. It's a different development. We don't have that. I'm not saying I'm against dual nationals. On the contrary, I've always thought for us to get dual nationals. I even want us to get a Japanese American called Henri Chase. But what I'm saying is, like, we need to develop so many players here in the US, so many good players, that the only dual nationals that make it are the ones that are really, really good. And then that's like the Jamal Musiala to Germany. Like, this guy's so good, come in, because you develop so many. But again, I think to your point of where you're saying where we bridge the gap there, it's also educating parents on your soccer starts at home program, because that will just raise the level of younger kids. And you talk about this. You say they should start as early as age 2, 3, right? As soon as they can walk.
Well, it's not so much they start playing football at that age, but what you find is that, again, when you connect all the dots and you look at it from a different perspective, a different angle, the feet are the furthest distance from the brain. So we rarely have opportunities to build these neural networks. So it's more about motor skill development. It's more about balance and rhythm, agility. You know, a little 2, 3-year-old trying to control an object with their feet, which is a ball, that's a mental exercise, man. So there's certain countries where those kids will get the tremendous head start. Again, it's not the brilliance and the coaching, so to speak. And it's not even so much the brilliance of the parents. It's just that you're more likely to have been exposed to a ball if you live in Uruguay or any of the countries where football is rich and a strong culture. But yeah, you're right. All the players are developed here, with like 1 or 2 exceptions. The only exception, there's 2 exceptions in Japanese football: Miura Kazu, who went to Brazil, and Takefusa Kubo, who went to Barcelona when he was 10. Okay. After that, nearly every player that's playing in Europe today, Japanese player, minimum of 150 to 200 J League clubs under their belt. Then they go. So they're all developed here. So they're not bringing them to develop them. They're bringing developed players at their peak, and they're bringing them there. And let me tell you, we've got truckloads of them more. They're everywhere here in Japan now. I mean, even I watch a lot of lower level football these days, J3, J2, because I've got friends that are coaching there. I tend to follow teams where I have some personal connection to, not more that I'm like this diehard fan. But I'm just saying, like, for example, while you were here in town and I missed you because I had to go to FC Imabari.
J3, right?
Yes, I went to J3 and my friend's team, Okada Takeshi, who is an iconic figure here, national team head coach, 2 World Cup tournaments. He's the current vice president of the JFA. And he bought a lower league amateur club 10 years ago. And 10 years to the day or to the month, he's gotten that team now into the J2. And I went to watch that game, and I was sitting there looking at the what do you call it? Sometimes my English, I lose my the paper that gives the
starting 11.
The paper that gives the starting 11, right? Starting 11 sheet, I guess. And I looked at it, and I looked at both teams, and I saw that they had pretty young players on those teams. They had a couple of total of 6 under 20 national team players. 4 were on one team and 2 were on my friend's team. So, man, these guys are getting playing time at young ages. They've already played, for national teams. So, yeah, Japan is really firing on all cylinders right now. And I think that they're just going to keep to improve and improve even more, because one of the parts that was really missing from Japan football, believe it or not, was the belief system. In the olden days, they were growing up, even playing in the J League, playing on the national team, watching their stars play in Europe. Now they play alongside them and against them. So it's a complete difference. But you're right. That's a very good, and it's a very strong, robust system that they have here for development that seems to be working.
Now, the last thing I want to touch upon is one thing that you actually just said. But before we get to that, just once again, parents that are watching this, what Tom usually preaches to is don't go to the park and just kick the ball. We talk about the kid playing with the ball, like actual keeping it close and tight spaces and learning to develop technical ability rather than just kicking the ball to each other. But anyhow, you guys can follow Tom on X because he posts a lot of videos about that. So actually showing. So go follow him on X. The handle will be in the description of this video. But one thing you said was about the seasonality of sports in America, which is true to a certain extent, right? Obviously, like a lot of the elite basketball players, they play basketball year round in the streets very often. Football, they play it almost year round, but football also has a portion of it where it's like a lot of weightlifting and developing and getting stronger. But with soccer, this is quite interesting. You have to play it the most. And I've had kids. I remember there was this 5 or 6 year old. He was very young. I think he was 5 that I coached, and he was Latino, very technical because I think he played with his dad. And I didn't really interact with his dad because his mom would pick him up, and I kept telling her, it's like, hey, he needs to play more. This kid was really good. Like, I'm not saying I'm looking at this kid saying this is the new Messi, but I'm looking at this kid and I'm saying, hey, there's potential there. He's way ahead of everyone. Eventually, she decided that he needed to take a break. She decided that he needed to take a break from soccer to try something else. I don't even know what the other sport was at this point. I think actually it was even something that was just running. It might have been something like track. I don't at age 5 or 6, right? A kid running. It wasn't volleyball. It wasn't basketball. It wasn't any sport involving a ball. I can't remember what it was. But they offered that program in the school, and she took it. So he took a few months off actually from soccer. When he came back, a lot of the kids continued to improve, and he was actually a little bit worse than he was before. The kid got dismotivated and stopped. I'm not saying any parent should only put their kids to play soccer. At the end of the day, your kid will have different passions, and maybe you don't want your kid to become a professional player. So you want him just to experience everything. But the problem is the moment you do that and he stays a whole year without playing while some other kids are playing, what's going to happen is he was dominant. He'll come back. He won't be dominant. So he's just going to think he sucks. He's not going to want to play. So I'm just speaking of things that I have experienced and seen, just like you are, and multiple issues with soccer in this specific country in the United States. And to your point about Japan having high numbers of soccer participants, so does the US. We have millions. We have more than enough to be a top country in the world when it comes to soccer. It's just that there's the seasonalities of sports. There's the lack of culture to get the kid to play at a very early age and just learn how to develop technical ability, having fun by default without someone putting 35 cones and asking him to do a drill. There's the coaches over coaching. Tom, I think we touched upon, obviously in an oversimplified manner, in almost most of the issues with soccer youth development in the U.S. these days. Is there anything else that we forgot?
No, I think we pretty much touched on everything. I could talk for another hour or two about.
Yeah, we talk a lot. I mean, I can't remember one of the days we were talking in Tokyo. We stayed out till almost midnight. It was a Tuesday also. I don't even know if you had work the next day. But we were out for like 3 hours talking. That's after we had already talked before. So yeah, if we started a podcast here, we will go on for 3 to 4 hours.
Oh yeah, not that about it. But yeah, no, I think we touched on all the major points.
Yeah. So everyone, thank you very much for watching. Thank you once again, Tom, for taking the time to be here and always trying to help U.S. soccer to the best of his ability, our ability. Now, again, if you guys learned something from this, good. If you have anything to teach us from your experience, let us know in the comment section below. Any stories that you might have had coaching here in the U.S., issues you've seen. The best way to learn something is through actual experience. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. Have a great day. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.